I have spent the last few days thinking about the December SAT, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts on the content and on what I think the College Board is going to do next. Specifically, I'd like to share 10 key content-based trends that should help guide you through the next few months as you prepare for your next ritual humiliation. All right then, let's cut this thing up. First one is about verb questions. There are some amazing hacks for solving verb questions, like for example, when three options are conjugated in the third person singular and one in the third person plural, the correct answer will just about 100% of the time be the answer in the third person plural. And vice versa. If you've got three plural verbs and one singular, the singular verb is your guy. This hack has worked for as long as I can remember, and it continued to work in the December SAT. But things do appear to be getting a little murkier. This question, for example, which appeared in last week's test, has a pretty uncommon blend of plural, singular, and non-conjugated verb forms. There are so few questions like this, in fact, that it's very hard to say if any of these answer choices is more or less likely to be correct. In other words, you're actually going to have to read this multi-layered hell of a sentence right here to determine if it's a fragment or a complete sentence before deciding whether the subject of the verb is plural or singular. And all of this with your very own brain. Okay, trend number 2 is about superlists. But before we begin, Tanya and I wanted to thank you all for your support. We've only just started the channel, and thanks to you, we've already cracked 1,000 subs. And the comments honestly have been overwhelming. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It's by far the easiest way to support the channel and help us achieve our goal of providing you with the best and most in-depth SAT content available on YouTube free of charge. And on that note, we put together a completely free worksheet which includes questions from the video. Link is in the description. So what are superlists? Superlists are just like regular lists, but where each list item is separated with a semicolon. To be clear, superlists aren't exactly new. They've appeared on the digital SAT since the very start, but this last test was a little different. Have a look at the sentence in the question right here. Pretty weird, right? It seems to go against everything you thought you knew about joining sentences with punctuation. Like, if you thought you could just reflexively delete the period and the semicolon because they're the same, well, think again. The answer is actually the period. The period correctly marks the boundary between this sentence and the next and avoids adding another semicolon, which would cause confusion. Or should I say, even more confusion than has already been caused. Because this sentence here is, well, pretty confusing even when you know the answer. And if you think it's wrong and ugly, you are at least half correct. But if you've been paying attention to the official College Board question bank, you might have noticed there is at least one example of this sort of sentence structure, where the superlist occurs in a fronted modifier. But as far as I can tell, this question is the first example I've seen where you have to consider how superlists and sentence boundaries relate to one another. It is definitely a bit of a mind melter, which is exactly why you should expect it to come up again in at least one of the next few tests. Moving on, trend number 3 is about transition word questions, which have been getting a little bit crazy. Generally speaking, the answers to transition word questions most often fall into one of 4 main categories. That's contrast, exemplification, continuation, and causation. And the most common versions of these words are however, nevertheless, on the other hand, for example, and for instance, moreover, likewise, furthermore, thus, and therefore. But in the last few tests, the College Board has been mixing things up. For one, they've increasingly been offering less common words and phrases. Like, instead of however, you'll be given granted. Instead of therefore, you'll get fittingly. So if you don't know these more esoteric transition words and phrases, you will struggle. The College Board is even including transition words and phrases from different categories altogether. For example, in the December SAT, we got there as an option, which is a little weird, but not as weird as blurring these lines, which is weird beyond comprehension. And just as before, this weirdness makes these questions a little less predictable, so I expect we'll see even stranger formulations in future tests. All right, trend number 4 is about these bullet point questions right here. In about 9 out of 10 of these, you should absolutely not read the bullet points because everything you need is right here in this sentence. That said, recent tests often do include one bullet point question that does require you to actually read the student's notes. And in the December test, we got one such question. Now, no need to panic. Everything stays pretty much the same. You start by assuming you don't have to read the bullet points at all and simply eliminate any options that don't satisfy the student's objectives. Now is the time to check the bullet points to see which option matches best. Also, here's a quick but critical piece of advice. Notice that the correct answer here uses the word sought, while the trap answer uses the word aim, which echoes the language used in the question itself. That's not a coincidence. The College Board loves punishing laziness, and what could be lazier than saying, hey, it says aim here, so B? In other words, if you do have to read the bullet points, read the damn bullet points, and avoid simply choosing the answer that feels best, because it's probably a trap. Okay, trend number 5. The hardest information and ideas questions are still all about making inferences and strengthening or weakening a claim. These questions are some of the hardest and most misunderstood questions on the SAT. The paragraphs are long and convoluted, stuffed with specialized language on topics that you are highly unlikely to have encountered in the past. Once you understand that these are really about the scientific method, however, like how an independent variable impacts a dependent one, and how different factors complicate, confirm, or weaken that relationship, things do get a little bit easier. But they're never easy, which again is why the College Board won't be changing things up here anytime soon. Okay, moving on to math, specifically quadratics and polynomials. I've noticed that a bunch of recent tests have included very hard questions that involve factoring quadratics and higher order polynomials. Take this example here from the December test. You're tasked with factoring this thing, which involves splitting the middle term. It's not all that difficult, fine, but it is stepping a little past the bounds of what's available in the official mock tests and the official College Board question bank. And it fits with the general trend of including questions that, broadly speaking, require a solid understanding of factoring, like these right here, which have all appeared in real tests in the last 12 months. These questions are hard because two questions that look totally different may be almost identical in their solutions and the skills required to solve them, while questions that look almost identical require radically different approaches. So they still are kind of formulaic, it's just that the formula is harder to spot reliably. Desmos works on some, but not on others, and many of these questions will be very difficult to figure out on the spot if you're not already familiar with the trick, all of which makes them especially good candidates for hard questions at the end of Module 2. Alright, number 7, the similar triangles inside a bigger right angle triangle concept. Okay, let's start a step or two back. Similar triangles are tested on every SAT, and you should be able to recognize common patterns like these. But there's one pattern that many students don't know. If you have a right angle triangle lying flat on its hypotenuse and you draw the altitude to form a right angle here, what you get are two smaller, similar triangles here and here. This setup is super simple to spot and exploit once you've grokked it, but it's very hard to wrap your head around if you don't already know it. It's also a concept that seems to appear increasingly often in the final few questions in the hardest version of Module 2, specifically because so few students seem to know it. In December's test, the concept literally appeared 2 times, just a few questions apart right at the end of Module 2. So we might not see it again in March, but don't be fooled, it's here for the long haul. Like these super fun percent questions, which won't be going away anytime either. Percent questions like these have increasingly appeared in Module 2 towards the end. They require you to combine multiple percent statements, and the numbers are typically very ugly. It's super easy to screw up your conversions of percents to decimals, and it can be very hard to tell if your final answer isn't off by a factor of 10 or 100. Unless you know this trick here, that is, the so-called system of squiggles. When you have a system of equations, all you do is set up square brackets here, a squiggle, and another pair of square brackets here. Insert all the left-hand sides into the square brackets on the left, separated by commas, then do the same on the right, and now Desmos does the rest. Very clean, very easy, and surprisingly robust across different iterations of this type of percent problem. You will definitely see a percent problem like this in your next SAT, so if you don't know this hack already, learn it. It is well worth your time. Okay, this next one is about the no solutions versus infinite solutions trap. In these types of questions, where you need to determine which equation, when paired with the original one, will produce no solution, students always seem to make the same careless error. After skimming the question, they start checking each answer choice, and when they get here, they see that the two lines are the same, so they assume that that must be the answer. But the question wasn't asking to find the equation that produces infinitely many solutions. It asks to find the equation that produces no solution. So the answer isn't B, It's C. This question really isn't all that hard, yet a huge proportion of students, regardless of math level, consistently fall for this trap. A version of this question first appeared in the question bank in the spring, and the College Board have featured it very heavily in recent tests. Now that you know the trap, however, it should be easy to avoid. Just make sure to read the task again before moving to the next question, which is generally excellent advice that none of you seem capable of following, no matter how much pain and suffering you put yourself through again and again. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, the last observation for today is about circle equation questions. In the December SAT, you might have seen a question like this one, where you have to solve for the constant here, but the circle isn't in factored form, so we can't easily figure out the coordinates of its center. We could graph it on Desmos, sure, but as you can see, it gets ugly and pretty confusing pretty quick. So unless you have a million minutes to spare and you enjoy hating your own life, you're going to need to learn a better way. And the better way of doing this is, of course, by completing the square. And if you don't already know how to complete the square, you will have to learn it if you want to reliably achieve anything above a 770, because this type of hard circle equation question occurs quite frequently at the end of Module 2. Okay, so here they are again, the 10 trends to keep in mind as you start the new year. Trend number 1, verb hacks still work, but new templates are muddying the waters. Trend number 2, expect new sentence structures with superlists. Trend number 3, transition words and phrases are getting weird. Trend number 4, new bullet point questions still sometimes require actually reading the bullet points. Trend number 5, the hardest reading questions still test model-based inferences. Trend number 6, factoring quadratics and higher order polynomials is really important. Trend number 7, the right triangle altitude theorem is increasingly common. Trend number 8, expect to see more systems of percentages questions. Trend number 9, make sure to read whether a linear system requires infinite or zero solutions. Trend number 10, circle questions will require completing the square, so learn it. Also, as I said at the start of the video, we've put together a free worksheet with questions from the video. Give them a go and let us know in the comments which topics you'd like us to explore next. If there's enough interest, I will happily put together a longer video with a thorough explanation. Okay, that's it for today. See you in the next one.